So for today, moving forward series episode, it's time to talk about the other New York team, and that, of course, is the New York Redbulls, who finished the season with a 9-5-9 record and had 32 points. They scored 29 goals this season and allowed 31 goals with a goal differential of -2. And despite the fact that they finished 6th in the Eastern Conference for the second year in a row, they got eliminated in the first round for the second year in a row, and this time it is the Columbus Crew. And you know what's even more disappointing about that elimination was that was kind of expected, that the Red Bulls were going to be eliminated. Like, if you look at all the games that happened in the Eastern Conference first round from this season, the game between Columbus versus the Red Bulls was really one of the only game where there wasn't really a lot of drama, and that it was kind of unsurprising that eventually the Crew were able to win that game and the Red Bulls got themselves eliminated. And if you're a Red Bulls fan, you know, that's kind of frustrated, the fact that you knew you had no chance of winning the game, and you hope that maybe with all the madness that happened in the playoffs, the storyline will be a little bit different in your game. No. And this is also where I kind of go back to what I said yesterday in terms of doing the wish list and saying that the Red Bulls is just that team that is kind of just good enough to make it to the playoffs. But when they get to the playoffs, that's when the issue become for them, and that they don't really have enough in terms of making a deep run into the playoffs. And in other words, they're stuck in this wheel of mediocrity that they have been in the last 2 years. Now, in terms of MVP on this team, I was actually thinking about not putting an MVP on this team, because really there wasn't a lot of standout player that come out of this team. But I decided to just put Caden Clark, and I put a maybe, and I probably should have capitalized the maybe part, because, you know, I think of all the players on this team that, you know, for most of them it's been kind of a letdown year, and most of them did not live up to the potential that they could be. Caden Clark was probably the only one, and even then, you know, he's only been with this team for half of the season, and obviously when he signed with the Red Bulls, and literally in his very first game he scored an absolute banger, and then he scored another absolute banger after that, and the hype level of this kid was just up the roof. And that, as much as I know he has a lot of high potential, and the ceiling is definitely high for him, we'll see whether or not if he can continue in the second season. And that we've seen many times where when you see a young player, they got a lot of hype after an incredible run that they've been in, and certainly Caden Clark had an incredible run with the Red Bulls when he joined the team, and especially in the playoffs where he became one of the youngest player to ever score in the playoffs. We'll see whether or not if that hype can continue heading into the second season, and really his first full season with the Red Bulls heading into next year. Now, the disappointment for the Red Bulls, again, I could have chose a lot of players on this team that could be a huge disappointment, because most of those players, including the one that they bought either in the offseason or in the middle of the season, just was a huge disappointment and did not live up to expectation. But I'm actually going to go with Kaku as the biggest disappointment for this team, and I know Kaku eventually finished as the top assist leader on this team with 5 assists, but the thing is, that is clearly nowhere near what the Red Bulls are expecting him to get, and especially for a guy that when he came to the Red Bulls, and he was definitely one of the best number 10 in the league, and was regularly putting up double-digit assist number. It is just a huge fall from grace of what happened in his first 2 seasons with the Red Bulls, and that I really think his decline really started in that game against SKC, where, remember, that was the game where Kaku basically he was frustrated with a foul, and he basically kicked the ball into the first row, and actually kicked the ball into one of the SKC fan, and that he ended up having a 2-game suspension. And he's even fortunate the fact that he got a 2-game suspension, because a lot of people say that he should have got more, and he probably could have have to pay some legal fee for the family that actually decided to sue him because of the action that he did. But ever since that moment, it really started his decline with this team, and it just gets to a point where not only there's been times where he's been not playing in this team because of injury concern, but he just have not looked the same ever since he came to this team in the first 2 seasons. And it's no wonder why there's so much rumor surrounded that he is potentially going to be leaving the Red Bulls, and that I think if you're the Red Bulls, you might as well just let go of Kaku in the offseason, knowing the fact that he's probably not going to rediscover his form that he had in his first two seasons, and that especially now that there is offer down in Liga MX, and especially I mentioned before how Tijuana are looking to trying to get him for $3 million. I suggest the Red Bulls might as well just take that money, even though that is definitely not as much, and certainly nowhere as much as they hope that eventually they were going to sell Kaku in a couple of years. Now, in terms of the top goal scorer, we actually had Brian White as the top goal scorer of this team with 5 goals, and a lot of people forgot that Brian White was playing with this team because he didn't really play a lot of game for the Red Bulls, and I know he had some injury concern early in the season, but it was kind of a mystery. Why did Brian White, who used to be a player that was kind of the backup for BWP before BWP got him injured and then he kind of took over the regular spot, I just kind of find it weird why he isn't getting as much minutes that he deserved, because I think this year he only played less than 900 minutes, and during that time he's able to score 5 goals. And when you have that kind of an impact kind of player, you should at least give him a chance in the starting row. And that it's no wonder why a lot of Red Bulls fans are kind of frustrated with the fact that when you look at that number 9 row, it just makes absolutely no sense why they decided to start Tom Barlow every single week, and that we see before in pretty much almost every single game, Tom Barlow is almost like a passenger of that team, and he's just one of those strikers that just not only are in the slump and being in the curse club of MLS striker, but he just doesn't really offer any goal scoring threat that you hope that he of course would get. And yet they decided to leave Brian White, who again, this is a guy that usually come off the bench, but he has shown that he definitely can score goals in his limited amount of minutes. So why in the world did they not decide to make him a starter and give him more minutes when you know that he has been able to score goals even with the limited minutes that he is getting? Now, then you got Daniel Royer with 4 goals this season. Royer is another guy that I could have easily put as a big disappointment. I mean, a guy that usually are one of the contributor in terms of this team in the goal scoring department. It is definitely a down year for Royer, knowing the fact that he only scored 4 this season. Then you got Kyle Duncan and Tom Barlow with 3 goals, while rounding up with Kaku with 2 goals to his name. Top assist leader, as I mentioned, Kaku leads the list with 5 assists, but for a guy that used to regularly register double-digit assists and pretty much right near the top of the list in terms of the most assists that any players have had in this season, 5 assists is definitely a huge fall from grace and huge drop the contribution that he had compared to when he came to this Red Bulls team in his first 2 seasons. Then you got Kyle Duncan with 4 assists, Christian Cáceres Jr., Daniel Royer, and Florian Valo rounds off that list with 3 assists in terms of the top assist leader. So what went right for the Red Bulls? Well, there wasn't really a lot that went right with this team, but I guess maybe the one thing that went right is that at least they made it to the playoffs, despite the fact that it's been kind of a turbulent year, and that in some way it was kind of a bit of a transitional year for the Red Bulls, where they're looking to try to maybe get rid of some of their old guards and bring in some fresh new players. And also they decided to fire Chris Armas, and pretty much that was the first big head coach that was let go this year, and that they pretty much went almost the entire second half of the season without a head coach and only had Bradley Carnell as their interim. But still, even despite all the challenge that they had, they still made it to the playoffs and still finished the same spot that they did last season. And then the other thing that went right for them is that Caden Clark was just a breakout start, and that the hype around this kid when he came into this, when he started to perform for this Red Bulls team, was definitely through the roof. And as I said, we shall see whether or not if he can continue that heading into the second season. And people forgot he's still a very young kid, and that I really hope people won't just look at what he did with the Red Bulls during his short time as thinking that he could be the next best thing, because when you have these young kids like that, there's been more times or not that just because these young kids have a great start with a team, or had a spell up here where they're in a great form in their career, it can easily just goes away and can easily heads into the demise if he cannot follow that in the second season, or people just put unrealistic expectation of what this young kids are going to do to continue to develop in his career. Now, what went wrong for the Red Bulls? Well, quite a lot. The first thing that went wrong is the inconsistent form. I mean, the Red Bulls is a team that I think are also one of the most inconsistent team in the league, and that this is kind of another team that's kind of like the Chicago Fire, where you just don't know what you're gonna get when they're playing a game. Like, you could see sometimes the Red Bulls can be really on, and they've been able to score goals to be able to get them over the line, and that they also have some big performance, like the decision day game when they were able to win 2-1 against Toronto. But there's also times where they just look absolutely garbage, and the MLS's back tournament was an example of that, where alongside with Atlanta, they were one of the lowest scoring team, and in fact, they only scored one goal during that tournament, and that one goal was that 1-0 win against Atlanta United. And then let's also not to mention, probably the lowest point for them this season has to be when they lost 5-2 against NYCFC. Like, getting absolutely destroyed by your intercity rival has to really hurts. But, you know, especially with the way that was also during that part of the period where it looks like maybe they kind of turn a corner and maybe things are gonna go right, and then all of a sudden they suffer a 5-2 loss against NYCFC, and it almost felt like they were back to being a team that just pretty much not getting over the hump, and back to that form that they've been in, which was a very inconsistent form. The second thing that went wrong for them is that, you know, the Red Bulls press, which everybody kind of talked about how this is the team that has the best press compared to any other team in the league. Well, that press kind of tactics that they've been using for pretty much a long time right now, and it's really been the identity of the New York Red Bulls. It's been continued to be very ineffective, and that they just haven't been as good in terms of their press compared to past Red Bulls team, and the Red Bulls team that regularly compete for Supporter Shield and winning Supporter Shield for the last 6 seasons. And I guess a lot of that has to do with the fact that the talent that they had before when they were running with the press is completely different than the one that they currently have right now, and there's a huge drop of talent that they currently have in their squad. And therefore, when you don't have really a lot of talent and you're still trying to run with a pressing system as they usually do, it's unsurprising that it's going to be ineffective, and that it just gets to a point where you wonder, heading into next season, now getting a new head coach in Garrett Stubert. And Stubert is a guy that I heard that he does use the press in his past head coaching role. We'll see whether or not if they're going to stick with that identity of continue to be a pressing team, or they're just going to start it, maybe kind of dropped off a little bit, and maybe not think about pressing a lot much, because there's been times where when they decide to try to press, they don't do it very well, and when they don't do the press very well, that's when gaps started to open up in the defense, and that's when a lot of their defensive mistake was because of the fact that guys were getting caught out of position because their press didn't really quite work whatsoever. And then the third thing that went wrong for this team is that most of the players that they signed was a complete underwhelm and just did not perform to the level that they kind of expect. And it shouldn't be a big surprise considering they were signing some very unknown players down in the English lower leagues, like in the Championship and in League One, and in almost it's like they were trying to maybe copy the same formula that the Rapids did a couple of years ago when they were going to sign all these players down in the lower leagues of England. And while some of them did eventually work out for the Rapids, time will tell whether or not if that's going to work out for the Red Bulls too, where they sign a lot of these players that is down in the lower leagues. And knowing the fact that Stubert is now their head coach, and he used to coach in the lower leagues with Barnsley, something tells me they're going to sign a lot more of those players, and we shall see whether or not if those players are going to actually perform. Now, moving forward for the Red Bulls, I kind of mentioned this in my wish list video yesterday, where I talked about the Red Bulls are kind of in a crossroad heading into this offseason. Where do they decide to blow it up and potentially let Gerhard Stubert pick the players that he wants to reconstruct this team, or the fact that they're going to just keep some of their core players, but they're going to continue to add pieces in the offseason? And, you know, from what I heard in terms of the rumors that they have, it looks like they're kind of going with the first option of kind of blowing it up, and that they're willing to pretty much go do a little fire sale, and pretty much they've been asking all these MLS teams that, you know, you want some of our players, go ahead, it's free to take, or, well, it's not really free to take, but as long as you give us some general allocation money, we can easily just sell them to one of your teams. And, you know, the Red Bulls, knowing in the past off season, and that they're definitely not shy of selling players, and especially big name players in the past that was let go into the off season, I won't be surprised if there's going to be a big name kind of player that is going to be sold off this off season. And speaking of which, that actually gets me to actually the third point of the moving forward series, and I'll come back to the second point of the moving forward for the Red Bulls. But the third point for the Red Bulls in terms of moving forward is that they're probably going to sell Kaku, and that Kaku is going to be that player that is going to be that big name player that eventually is going to sold off. And again, I just don't see any point of them potentially keeping him heading into next season, because again, I just don't really see that he's going to rediscover the form that he had when he was with this team in his first two seasons, and that you better sell him now and get some profit instead of maybe if you decide to delay and maybe keep him for one more season, and that if he does not once again start to continue to go through a decline, you probably might not even get any money out of him. So yeah, I really think that if they're if there is one big name player that they're going to sell, it's probably Kaku. And as I said before, with the $3 million offer that Tijuana decide to offer them, take that offer. I mean, it's a generous offer, even though it's not as much as they definitely hope for when they eventually want to sell Kaku to another team. Now, going back to the second point of the moving forward for the Red Bulls, has a lot to do with the current head coach, which is Gerhard Stubert. And, you know, the big question is, how is he going to do in his first full season with the Red Bulls? I remember when he actually took charge of this team, and the first game he took charge of this team was that playoff game against the Columbus Crew, and that has to be the first time in MLS history we have ever seen a new head coach coming into his first game of a new team, and it's a playoff game. Like, that's almost as if you are a new employee at a restaurant, and the boss basically said, you know, you might be new to our restaurant, and you probably know nothing about our team, but we're just going to throw you in the deep end, and you're just basically going to lead the team and see how it's going to go. Good luck. Hopefully you don't turns out to be an absolute disaster as the last leader or the last supervisor we fired last time. And yeah, I mean, that basically kind of is the point of this, and that it was just so strange seeing that Stubert coming in his first game of this team, and it's literally a playoff game, and he didn't even have enough time to even know his squad and what kind of system that he wants to implement into this team. But now that heading into the offseason, he is going to try to look at this team and see what kind of acquisition that he needs to make in terms of improving this team. We'll see whether or not if that is going to be a way that can help him to be successful in his first full season with the Red Bulls. And also, he, just like what I talked about NYCFC and how they are a team that's not have front office that's not afraid in terms of firing head coaches. The same can say about the Red Bulls, where I think Stubert, he's not going to give as much of time as what people think he would, and that definitely the minimum that Stubert need to do in his first full season is get this Red Bulls team into the playoffs. Because if he does not get this team in the playoffs, and that this team continue to sink even lower as we have seen in the past two seasons, no doubt I think Stubert would probably not last the end of the year if he does not get this team into the playoffs. But yeah, there you have it. That is pretty much it for my moving forward series for the New York Red Bulls. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this? If you're a Red Bulls fan, what do you think went right, went wrong, and most importantly, moving forward, what is your team going to look like heading into next season? But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.